Greetings to all kind readers. Address me as Jane Eyre. As an orphan, I spent my sorrowful childhood with a cruel kin of mine, Aunt Reese, and my cousin John Reese, the blood who mortified and treated me like I was no more than his servant. That family has never deigned to care for me.
Jay, what a beautiful day. Yes, Mrs. Reed, I have a great news for you. You are going to school now. Wait a bit. Does it mean I get free education? Not quite, but you're officially homeless now. That's right. You think I get the hell out of my house. You are a monster. Oh, screw it. I hate you, hypocritical.
Therefore, heading to Lowood Institution was a pleasurable denouement. At least, that was what my infantile soul could have thought. Mr. Brooklehurst, the hypocritical master of Lowood, made my days there distressed.
Alright, welcome to Lowood. I'm Mr. Brookhurst, and if you had any questions, keep it for yourself, please. Hi, I'm Ellen. Got you, mate.
Taking it out of Lowood and being taken in by Mrs. Fairfax, I served as a governess at Thornfield teaching Adele. It was when I really found a bit of joy in my life. After some time, I got to know my gorgeous master, Mr. Edward Fairfax Rochester, also the love of my life.
They fell in love, blazing hot, like their house later on.
Our time together was not always serene, but we eventually got engaged. On the day of our marriage, I was aghast that my fiancée had already had a wife called Bertha.
Bertha is the violently insane first wife of Edward Rochester, who moved her to Thornfield and locked her in a room on the third floor. She was the one who burned the house.
I was disconsolate and had no choice but to leave Thornfield, leave my love and passion to keep my dignity intact. Hence, I got to know the kind Rivers family of Mary, Diana, and St. John. Later, through St. John, I discovered that a deceased uncle of mine had left me a fortune of £20,000, which I happily shared evenly to the three of them, as I also found out that they were all my cousins. Blissful and delighted as I was to finally have a family, a huge inheritance, and a place that I can call home. Not so long after, St. John wanted me to be his missionary wife and follow him to India to spread the enlightenment of Christianity. That was a real conundrum that I was torn between of choosing either my passion or my autonomy. But later on, after having heard a sound which I thought was from Rochester, I immediately left Moor House to head back to Thornfield and follow the call of my love. I got to Thornfield as soon as possible, only to find out that Bertha had caused a conflagration which turned Thornfield into ashes and caused Rochester to lose a hand and his vision, but I did not care. We finally had our dream marriage and lived together happily forever after.
Well, so yeah, after leaving Rochester, I came back to being a typical low-class citizen. Well, however, obviously, as the most imperative character in the entire freaking story, not only was I conveniently rescued by the Rivers family, who in fact are my relatives, it turned out that I also happened to be inherited a huge amount of money, some of which was spared for the Rivers as a way of showing my courtesy for everything they've done. Afterwards, some of my cousins, St. John, requested me to accompany him on a journey to India as his missionary's wife. And as much as I love to go back to Rochester, however, after all the suffer I went through during my childhood, as well as what happened to Thornhill, I eventually agreed to my cousin's proposal. We went to India and spent the rest of our life living happily ever after.
And here's the meaning of our alternative ending.
This ending represents the strive for humanity to break through any chains that will constrain them. Jane Eyre's position right now is a standing analogy for such mentioned philosophical ideals, as in this ending, she broke the stereotypes and joined John on her quote-unquote crusades to another nation, from being locked up in a room at Gateshead Hall to exploring the whole of Indian Peninsula. It is a clear presentation that humans will always try to break free, to find liberty, even through much tribulations. The aftermath of Thornfield and the mission to India are two contradicting situations that closely portrayed the balancing of society in the 19th century, where the gap between aristocracy and the third level of social hierarchy grew even further, where the rich lived in mansions and the poor lived in shims.